Hey everyone, it's Ryan Leonard with Wolfnest Property Management, and today we're going to be talking about how to understand your occupancy rate or an occupancy rate. That's kind of hard to say, but let's take a look here. If you're a landlord, again, whether you're aware of it or not, the occupancy rate is something that you should know or understand. Whether you have one property or you have 20 properties, understanding occupancy, because it is one of the things that can cost you the most money when you have vacancy. You want to make sure that you're aware of your entire portfolio and how it's performing. Now, it's pretty easy to understand or how to come up with that occupancy rate. So I'm not going to go into the math, but if you would like to, kind of find out your occupancy rate for your portfolio, feel free to click on this link. You can actually see how you come up with those numbers and those rates. But at the end of the day, occupancy rate is a big indicator whether or not you're efficient with how you're managing your property and if it's profitable. So again, here's a quick breakdown of it. Take the total number of occupied units, then divide that by the number of properties you have available, and then times that by 100, and there's your occupancy rate. So again, it's pretty straightforward. But if you see a lower occupancy rate, that could mean that you have some issues. Whether it's you're not structuring your lease agreements appropriately or having them expire during the off season, really the months of November through February. That's something that you want to avoid. Or if you have all of your tenants currently on month-to-month agreements, and it's the holiday season and they all put in their 1 month notice, and then boom, you have 4 or 5 vacancies. That's something that you want to avoid. So we can talk a little bit more about structuring lease agreements to help with your occupancy rate, but we'll look at some other stuff here first. So biggest thing is what can affect those rates. So obviously, it can be neighborhood by neighborhood, but it could even be building by building or even as specific as unit by unit. One of the things that you want to look at is, the properties that have higher occupancy rates, do they have great amenities in the area like schools or parks or public transportation or restaurants, things that really draw the tenant to that area. A lot of times, being closer to one of the colleges or universities, we're going to see some of the lowest occupancy rates in the valley just because there's just so much going on in those areas. Also, if you see a low occupancy rate, try to ask yourself, why is that? If it's, constantly turning over, maybe it's a tenant screening problem that you may have. Or if it's just not running out, you may not be highlighting some of the amenities that are actually part of that property. But again, if you're not laying that out there in the marketing, tenants aren't going to be aware of it, or maybe you just have crappy photos when it's online and it's just sitting there. So there's a lot of things that can kind of go into both of those, but at the end of the day, we're be happy to help you with those. So how do you maintain a high occupancy rate? Honestly, big part of that is just being a good landlord, making sure when a tenant puts in a maintenance request, you're being responsive to those. Ensuring that the property is well kept, both interior and exterior. A lot of times the owners, they just feel like they don't need to invest back into that property, but that's just not the case. There's going to be some recurring expenses associated to being a landlord or an investor that you need to factor into your calculations. Whether it's a spring and fall cleanup of the exterior to help with overgrowth, or some exterior paint. Curb appeal is a big thing. Now, it doesn't mean you have to spend tens of thousands of dollars, but by doing smaller kind of PM or preventative maintenance in between tenants or during occupancy, it's a great way to keep those tenants in place, or if you do have turnover, minimize the vacancy in between them. And a big one too is the tenant screening process. Not being in a rush to put any tenant into that property, put a qualified tenant into that property, because they're more likely to pay on time, take care of the property, and also, if you're a good landlord, they're more inclined to stay. And really, again, vacancy is the most expensive part of owning a property, so that's what you want to try to minimize. So, and again, There's a lot of good practices that you can do as a landlord to help retain those tenants, but just be the best landlord you can be. That's kind of bottom line. So that's just some information. If you want to dive into this a little bit more in depth, there's my contact information. Shoot me an email, give me a call. Be happy to discuss your portfolio and see if we could be a good fit. Thanks.